Hi, I'm Ashley Cooley, a birth, baby, and sleep specialist and mom of 3. There's so much information out there, right? This show is dedicated to helping you clear out the noise so you can figure out what will work best for your baby and your family. If you're looking to learn more about your baby, gain more confidence in your parenting, and get as much sleep as you can through it all, you've come to the right place. Bringing up baby is about to get a little easier. This is Ashley. Welcome back. So I'm chatting with our friend Kelsey Marr again today. She and I like to get together every once in a while and chat about particular topics. She really brings this unique perspective as a birth researcher and doula. And today we're chatting about creating boundaries, particularly when it comes to, well, the time of year that we're currently in, germs, having newborns, that can be stressful sometimes. But maybe from family members or well-meaning loved ones, people in our lives that may give unsolicited advice or just have or had a different way of doing things. And it's just really hard to kind of filter that through with already so much information that we seem to be getting out there. So yeah, we're going to chat about it. Maybe you can relate. And maybe you'll grab some tips or some ideas on how you might navigate creating your own boundaries or expressing them to those in your life that you feel that could be helpful to. All right, so here's my conversation with Kelsey. The time of year that it is, having a newborn, worry about germs. Mm-hmm. And this is the biggest one where I say, don't go to the grocery store for at least a few weeks because there's always someone at the grocery store that wants to touch your baby. But people are afraid of, well, just being seen, I think, as like, oh, I don't want to be that kind of person. Like, I'm nice. I want to like allow people to hold my baby or to do things. But I'm also like, I don't want you to touch my baby, or I don't want you to hold my baby right now. Or if I don't want that, how that can feel, how that can look to other people. We're worried about that. So one of them is around the germs, and another one is family members. Like some pregnant people or people who are expecting already know that X family member is going to be a problem. Or they already have said certain things, or I'm worried about how they'll react because we just want to hunker down and be like a little family unit in the first little bit. We don't want visitors. And that's wonderful to know and to like plan for. But then they're like, how do I tell so-and-so? And how do I do that and still like be able to have a relationship with them because of maybe the personality types. Anyway, I could go on, but I think you know what I'm getting at. What has been your experience with those things? What do you or have you advised people on what to do with that?
Yeah, I think like boundaries comes up a lot in my doula work. I mean, both prenatally and postpartum. It came up a lot when I was doing birth research in terms of pregnancy.
That's interesting.
Because pregnant bodies are almost seen as like public goods.
Oh, yes.
Right? Like everybody thinks that they can comment on a pregnant body. Everybody thinks that they can touch it.
No.
And like for my PhD research, one of my participants was actually like, I don't understand why people keep touching my belly because they're not touching my baby, they're just touching me. Like, it's weird to be touched in that way. It's weird to be asked questions when you're pregnant. And honestly, that's one of, like, my biggest fears about pregnancy. Right now, my pregnancy isn't visible. But I fear how I'm going to react when people stare at me or ask me when I'm due or whatever. Because I am, like, generally open and friendly, but also it's none of their business.
But I think many of us want to be polite,
exactly,
and they're well-meaning, or oh look, they've already touched me and my belly. What am I going to do now?
Exactly,
kind of thing.
And so I think, like, in all of that's to say, is I think this is a really important conversation, and I think like each of these types of boundaries gets discussed and supported and negotiated in different ways, right? Like in terms of boundaries around pregnancy, boundaries around parenting, boundaries in the hospital when we're talking with like medical professionals and what we actually want during our birth or postpartum or our prenatal care. I think it's good when we can identify what those boundaries are, because oftentimes we don't know what our boundaries are until they're crossed.
Yeah.
Until somebody makes us feel uncomfortable.
Totally.
Until we have that realization of, well, I didn't want
That didn't feel great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I have my clients do is to sit down and start thinking about what their boundaries are for postpartum and with whom. Like, are you okay? And that includes like having a conversation with their partner, their husband, their spouse around like, what are my boundaries in terms of how we're sharing the load? What are my boundaries around how the work is being divided between us? What are my boundaries around how I feel about you taking care of my body postpartum if I need help?
Do we want visitors? Who do we want?
When do
what do we want them to do? Yeah.
And I think it's important to understand too that that's not a conversation that's just going to happen once. That's an ongoing conversation. So like I can say right now that I don't want visitors in the first 4 weeks or whatever. But maybe I have a C-section and that actually becomes, I don't want visitors in the first 6 weeks because I have to recover from surgery on top of figuring out how to parent. Or I could say, like, I would love to do like the 40-day postpartum, don't get out of my bed.
What many cultures do, yes,
right?
Yes.
But then that also, it's not just about me, it's about my partner too. And if I want to do 40 days not getting out of bed and he wants to share our child with his parents who don't live in the city, then that has to be a negotiation, right? So, I mean, this is different than like dealing with the family member that is not going to react well to your boundaries.
Yeah.
But like understanding like those boundaries take time to notice, and 2 are constantly negotiated because like or many of them are constantly negotiated because your context is going to change.
Yeah, totally. I put a pin in something when you were talking about it because I love that you said it that way. While we're figuring out how to parent. I just love that because you're a doula. You fit in this field, in this world. But it's like, you know that you don't know what you don't know. from you being it personally you. And just that you understand that even as a doula, like you and your partner are going to have to figure out how to parent. And it's not the, we need so-and-so to come over to show us. Not that you can have that. And if you want that, great. But that's just that is what all of postpartum, that's what parenting is learning as you go. But having that just as that understanding, I think is huge.
My like experience as a birth researcher and doula has taught me that no matter what, it's going to be a shit show. And I don't necessarily mean that like parenting's always a bad thing. It's
full of events.
It's a learning curve.
Yeah.
And I mean, if my pregnancy so far has taught me anything, it's one thing to know the research and to know other people's experiences. It's another thing to experience it bodily yourself.
Yeah.
And so I can advise and guide people through nursing and feeding their baby with however they choose to feed their baby, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I know what that's going to feel like with my own baby, or that I know what my particular stressors are going to be while I'm trying to figure out how to feed my baby.
Totally. I know when I was planning and preparing to give birth, and I was saying to myself prior to my third delivery, because we had a different set of plans, game plan, mindset going into that delivery. And I thought to myself, oh man, I'm just going to sit on that stability ball the whole time. I'm going to rock on it. I'm going to bounce on it. I'm going to use that as my comfort. And the first like 2 seconds of sitting down on it, I shot right back up like, I hate this. So plans went out the window. So planning is helpful, but also understanding that those plans may, not turn out the way you thought that they would. So ongoing conversations need to be had so that every time, like, you're just comfortable with what's going on.
And in terms of like this time of year, RSV, making sure people don't kiss your baby. I mean, one thing that I have found works well for my clients is I recommend wearing their baby the first couple of times they take their baby out in public or until they feel comfortable.
So with a wrap or carrier.
Because it tends to keep, like, if baby's that close to you, people tend not to lean in to kiss or touch your baby quite as much. I also, I suggest that they throw me under the bus as their doula all the time, being like, no, my doula said we have to do X or Y. I can't go out right now, or I need to stay home. I also tell them, it's okay to just say, the baby's asleep right now. They're just going to stay with me. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't have to hand your baby to anybody else. You can, and that takes time to build that confidence and to build that security in saying that. But you can just say, no, baby's gonna stay here. Or, you know what, baby's asleep. Maybe you can hold them if they wake up later.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe you want them to hold them while they're sleeping. But it's what you want. Exactly. I say a lot of similar things, and I think being in this post-COVID world, we can still use that as an excuse. Mm-hmm. Not that you're necessarily afraid of COVID per se. It could be any germ, any illness, any disease or whatever, but wanting people to wear masks, washing their hands, like those kinds of things, I think are more socially accepted now because we went through COVID. So had I done that 12 years ago with my first daughter, oh, excuse me, can you wear a mask and wash your hands? Actually, I did do the wash your hands thing. I was like, you got to wash your hands. I don't care where they've been before you're washing them, before you're touching my baby. But I can understand that it depends on the person. Like, the way I would talk to my own parents is different than how I talk to my in-laws. I love them both. I respect them both, but it's a different relationship. Yeah. And I'm going to be more worried or just cautious of how I say something to my in-laws or to my friends or to my, maybe not friends, but to different people than I would for my own parents, who I could say things differently, but they get it.
Yeah. And I think your point about this kind of post-COVID era brings up an important point about, like, people's mindsets take time to shift, right? So if you can start these conversations about, like, what you're anticipating being comfortable with early on and give people time to warm up to it. Like, for example, I'm 13 weeks pregnant. I had a conversation with my parents the other day about updating their whooping cough vaccines, getting their flu shot, getting a COVID booster. Mm-hmm. And we had that conversation now, because not that my parents are going to have any issue doing those things, but, like, if they needed time to arrange things, if they needed time to shift their mindset around being vaccinated before touching the baby, then that gives them time to do that.
Totally. Because if that's what you're looking for and you have your baby in arms and you're at home and they're calling to come over, that's not the first time you should be telling them to get their vaccines before. Right? Yeah.
Or not the first time you should tell them, like, I expect you to wash your hands, or I expect you, like, my mom's talking about when she wants to come visit, because they don't live in Canada. Yeah. And she was like, well, maybe I'll come, like, plan for, like, 6 weeks after your due date. And it's like, well, but I could go 2 to 3 weeks overdue. I'm still going to be figuring out how to feed my baby. I in particular want the space to figure that out a little bit on my own before calling in help. I'm not comfortable with planning for 6 weeks out. But that needs to be a discussion now. Also, I mean, I recognize because she's traveling, but also regardless of how far they're traveling, you start that conversation now, it gives time for her to adjust what she's thinking, what her expectations are.
Yeah, yeah. And if yours change or they're welcome to.
Yeah.
But having those conversations early, obviously very helpful.
Looking for the best for your baby? Atlantic Canada's Baby Store is here for you. Nurtured, which is right here in Halifax, Nova Scotia, has the best products for baby. The staff are so incredibly helpful, and they have the most top-rated car seats and strollers you won't find anywhere else. So whether you need expert advice or the perfect baby gear, Nurtured's got you covered. Nurtured, supporting your parenting journey every step of the way.
Your point about people sometimes not really even thinking about boundaries until a line has been crossed. So true. Because the other time I hear talk about boundaries from families is as a sleep consultant. There are lots of opinions out there, not just from family, from people of a different generation who were maybe given different messages too. Oh, well, we just did this and look, you're fine. Or, oh, I just did this, you slept all the time. First of all, selective memory. Okay?
Yeah.
Number one. But number two, people are just finding, I think some people are finding that hey, this is how I want to do things. Or I don't know and I'm still figuring it out and maybe I don't have the answer, but I also don't appreciate somebody saying, well, you just have to do it like that. Oh, so then it makes them feel that they're doing something wrong. They're not parenting the quote unquote right way.
Yeah.
And where does that go? So why isn't your little one sleeping? Oh, you're not feeding them enough. Give them some extra or give them some formula instead of there's just going to be a lot of that sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's the other side. It's the postpartum planning and those early days and those kinds of boundaries with a new baby. And then it's how we're actually parenting or feeding them or helping them sleep or whatever that is. And then everybody in your life or some people in your life having an opinion about that and sharing and how that makes someone feel as a new parent. This is something that I think most people are dealing with in some way, shape, or form at some point along their journey. And it's hard to sometimes, unless it's their first pregnancy and they're listening to this episode and they have a bit of a heads up and now they're going to start thinking about it early and talking about it early. But if we've already gotten to that, boundaries, those lines have been crossed or those are just hard conversations to have. I think no matter what.
Really hard conversation to have. And I find a lot of the work that I do as a postpartum doula, other than the practical help, is listening to people after they've had these conversations with somebody else and reaffirming there is no right way to parent your kid. Whether the research will make suggestions, your values will make suggestions, but there's no one right way. Something that I tell people all the time is people have been doing this relatively successfully with a lot less information and a lot fewer resources than we have right now. And regardless, you will find your path in doing this because you have these opportunities. You have the opportunity to decide for yourself what's going to work for yourself.
That is the one benefit or one of the benefits of having maybe too much information or a lot of information is we can learn more and choose and pick and choose.
And get overwhelmed by all of
Yeah, I just think there's so many different ways to parent. We hear more about what other people are doing, maybe finding something that works for us. But again, other people in your life maybe don't get that.
And I mean, maybe part of those strategies are setting a boundary for yourself to lessen the number of inputs. So
you and your social media.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's where I was going.
Yeah.
So if you have the capacity to limit your social media, maybe it's not deleting it totally,
Completely,
but maybe it's going back to what social media looked like when I was in high school. So it's actually only your friends on social media.
Yeah. And taking pictures of your food and how awesome
exactly.
it looks.
Get rid of all of the like big influencer branders who are telling you how to baby your baby. Maybe you decide, look, these are the books that work for me. They align with my particular values, whether they're really evidence-based or they have a faith base or whatever. Whatever values are important to you in your parenting journey, go to those books. Go to those websites. Go to that select number of guiders and only take those inputs in. Because we know it's too much. It is too much information. We know that mom groups have negative, like mommy groups on Facebook have like negative mental health impacts and negative parenting impacts. We know that, I mean, it's all just too much. And so sometimes it is just it's hard. It's easier said than done. But sometimes it is making that decision for yourself to just limit what voices you're going to listen to. That said, it's also really hard if you have that mom or that mother-in-law who's giving unsolicited advice. And unfortunately, each of our relationships with those people are different and have to be massaged in different ways. Like, my mother-in-law was a pediatrician. I joke all the time that when I have my baby, I'm just handing her to Dr. Kathy, and Kathy can do everything. We're just doing what Dr. Kathy tells us to do. But at the same time, like, negotiating what my relationship looks like with my mother-in-law might look different than what your relationship looks like with your mother-in-law. And so there's not like one size fits all in terms of like, this is how we set boundaries.
And I do remember there being, I mean, there's a couple off the top of my head where it's like, I didn't know that was the boundary I had until it got crossed. I didn't know that, and so if or when that happens, I think it's still important to have the conversation even after the fact. I've done that before. Like, hey, that was actually something that I was wanting to do as a first time parent or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think with a lot of our conversations, we kind of go in the same light of like, there's no one way to do things. Thank God. Let's hear about the research. Let's hear what the recommendations are. Let's get this information, but then let's follow what feels like it's more in line with my personality or what we want to be as parents or what have you, and trying to clear out the noise. Easier said than done with social media, because we can just close that app for a little bit or take ourselves off there. But when it's friends and family, anything you can do to prepare and have those conversations ahead of time is such great advice. But if you do find yourself in the moment right now, like it's just happening in front of you and you're just realizing this is not something that I want to subscribe to. You say your sleep consultant said, no, I need this kind of routine and it's working well for us. Yeah. This is what works well for us. I too have had a very close friend who had a new baby. There was a big family gathering coming up. She didn't feel comfortable passing the baby around and knew that that's what was going to happen. Family gathering, everyone's seeing the baby for the first time. I said, you go, here's a wrap. Let's wrap that baby up. That baby's going to be attached to you, sleeping, and you're going to be feeding. You're busy. They can all see the baby from a distance, curled up in your arms that way. Like those little things can make a huge difference when you're actually like in that moment and got to deal with it right now.
And just the reminder that you're not gonna, like, honestly, you're not gonna fuck it up. No one decision that you're gonna make is going to be like make or break that baby's outcomes. Like if you, no matter how you feed, no matter how you sleep, like there's obviously safe sleep recommendations. There's obviously like you do need to feed the baby.
Yeah, there's a couple things you gotta take care of.
But like one or the other is not gonna make a huge difference in the long run.
No.
Like, you are fine and your mom followed Dr. Spock. I don't know.
Am I fine? I'm a little...
I don't know what
still questionable.
my parents followed. And I'm making it through the day.
Yeah.
So people that have done it with a lot less information, a lot less support, a lot fewer resources.
But because of this information that we do now have and research, risk, like, we are choosing to do things a little bit differently. So I think worst case scenario, you're not doing something how your best friend would, or how your cousin or your sister or your parents or whoever. Yeah. And we can nod and smile and say thank you for that advice, or I value your opinion, and you close the door and it goes out the window and you do you.
Yeah. And
so if it's just being polite or what have you, sometimes that's all we can do.
Find your support people who listen without giving advice. Because oftentimes we don't want advice. We just want to be able to talk through things or consider things out loud. And that may mean that your mom or your best friend or your neighbor or your partner is not your best support person. But see if you can, like, make those connections to find your support. Maybe your best support person is your sleep consultant, or is your doula, or is your lactation consultant. The person who can create, while guiding you with their expertise, still can create that space where they're not necessarily going to give you advice on everything. They're going to give you space to make your own decision.
What you said from the very beginning, it's an ongoing conversation with yourself, with the people in your life, partner, otherwise. And just, I guess, realizing that we all, even our well-meaning friends and family who may be of a different generation, who may have gotten different messaging, we're all doing the best with what we've got. Most people in your life who care about you want to help and are offering, it's well-meaning advice, at least. And I think that's where I take it with the, you know what, sometimes people are just going to give it, whether you ask for it or not, and whether it's something you agree with or not, or that is important to you or not. But we can all just still say, like, thank you, I appreciate it, knowing that they're just trying to help. But like I said, then they're going to leave and you're going to close the door and you just do what you need to do. Because ultimately that's what we're all just trying to figure out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's just one step at a time.
Yeah. Well, I hope, it sounds like you're pretty good at creating your boundaries and figuring those out. So
we'll see.
Let's keep tabs on you, and we'll figure out how see how those boundaries work out for you.
Watch me revise everything as soon as this baby arrives.
You know what? You're allowed.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
If you're looking for more information or support along your parenting journey, check out birthbabysleep.ca. That's where you're going to find prenatal classes, postpartum and new baby resources, and sleep support during the childhood years. Lastly, but certainly not least, if you got something out of this episode or our show in general, leaving a rating or a quick review goes a really long way to helping others find us. So please consider leaving one. That's all for now. I'm Ashley Cooley, and we'll see you back here next time.